Welcome to folks who have started joining us. We'll begin in just about 2 minutes. Again, welcome, and we'll begin in less than a minute. Okay. All right. Well, depending on which clock I look at, I've got either right on time or just about to hit the 11 o'clock hour. So why don't we go ahead and begin? Good morning and welcome. My name is Kim Anderson with Southern Regional Education Board, and we're glad to be with everyone today for our 6th webinar in a 6-webinar series. So we're wrapping up this series today entitled Bouncing Back from COVID, Using Education and Workforce Development Dollars. To kick us off, it's been our pleasure through the whole series to have SREB's president, Dr. Stephen Pruitt, give us a kickoff. Would you like to do that this morning, Stephen? There we go.
As always, good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. We really appreciate all of you. I look around and I see names that I've seen every week that we've done this. It's always great to see you. Appreciate you being here. Of course, love seeing board members like Karen Hoffman and Allison Roberts from the governor's office in Arkansas, and just really appreciate all of you being here, and you've been so good about being dedicated to being here. Again, just as a proud president's moment, just again want to say thank you to Kim and for pulling all this together. I think it's been incredible. I think that the information shared, the individuals who have come to be a part of this have been great, and it's needed. The other thing about this is how time critical all of this is. Here we are, we're trying to bounce back. We're trying to get back from the shutdowns that happened in COVID. And it's created more inequities. It's created more issues that we're having to battle and create. You know, I talk about a lot that education is not rocket science, because rocket science is actually easier. Now, given I'm a chemist, so maybe that's an unfair statement, but the reality is this is hard. And having these conversations and getting this launched, I think, is a critical first step. What I hope that we can ask from all of you is that even though this is the 6th in the series, first of all, my hope is that we're not going to be ending this completely here. There's going to be continued work. In fact, I'll give you a little bit of a heads up that we're going to have a new report coming out soon about collaborative partnerships and work-based learning. And you should probably come and join us when those hit as well. Because as we continue this work, it's going to be something we really need to do together. It's going to be something that's awfully hard to pull off individually in states. Certainly there's going to need to be people around the table within the states, but also there's opportunities across states, especially because we have so many people who cross state lines for their employment. So SREB stands ready to help you as always. We want to be there for you. We want to be able to support you and give you advice based on research, and if needed, to actually be there and help facilitate conversations. But today, I think you've got a great end of this series in batting cleanup here. You're going to hear from some great speakers. Nick in particular, I had the opportunity to work with him quite a bit over the last couple of years, and you're going to see some really thoughtful ways that they're approaching that in Alabama. So thank you for being here. We look forward to the work, and we look forward to supporting you as this work moves forward. Kim, back to you.
All right. Great. All right. And you know what I realized I neglected at the very beginning to say? We would love for everyone to say hello in the chat box with your name, the organization or institution that you represent, and your state. You should also see a hello message from our colleague Jasmine Jones, and you can chat with Jasmine if you have any questions or difficulties during the webinar. So let's go. What is the series? Just to wrap it up, you'll see there have been 6 sessions. Today is the 6th. We've kind of designed the series so that you can come in and attend any session that you like, and it will stand on its own. But should you wish, and we hope that you do, you either attend or get the materials here from all 6 sessions, because together they provide kind of a 6-pronged approach to the issue, to the problem of bouncing back for people, for institutions, for economies. So in each session, we'll have an hour today to get inspired, inform our collective work. I'll be talking and sharing some key strategies or thought pieces that SREB recommends you have in mind as you're leading this work in your states. We're going to spotlight the resources to get it done with and hear from a leading state and how they're putting it all together. Our focus today is, of course, reinforcing connection. So all the 5 things we've talked about leading up to now are all things you can be doing, each one on its own. But the question is how to pull these things we've been doing together, or we've been doing now in response to COVID in this short-term emergency response mode. How to ensure that they're knit together carefully and thoughtfully into our state's long-term plans for growth and for prosperity. So this is our context, right? We've got this crisis, the short-term pieces here as well. You know, Stephen's mentioned in his intro to several of these other sessions that it's not just COVID we're trying to bounce back from. We're trying to catch up to many of our peer countries around the world in terms of having our businesses and industries ready and workers ready to compete in terms of using technology and all that comes with it in these new workplaces. So we can look at it as a crisis or an opportunity. Now, here's the crisis piece. You may be thinking in your work day to day right now to help your state bounce back, one step ahead, one step ahead, one step ahead, right? Just what's in front of me. What we want to do today is figure out how to look a little bit more from what's right in front of us down on the ground to where those stairs eventually go, big term, long term, out towards and beyond the horizon. And so what are some actions that SREB recommends? All right, so we want to think about attending to 3 things. We encourage you with your colleagues to think about vision, data, and systems. And we'll break each one of these down and see a couple really obvious ways in which they intersect. They all intersect and go back and forth, but today we'll touch on a few particular ways in which they do that. So first, when we think about data, and I'm not going in order of vision, data, systems, I'm going to take data first for a reason. When we think about data, here's what we want to be doing. Of course, you've seen this if you've been on our other sessions, us encouraging you to make sure that as you're looking at what you're doing now and looking towards that longer term goal, that you have all the right players around the table, right? You can check out webinar 1 where we really dove into this and heard about some incredible rapid cycle data use to do just this in Indiana. As you're doing this right now, kind of that short-term stairway there, looking down at the ground that we saw a second ago, this is where we want to be asking, even as we're running a mile a minute to put out fires. We want to be asking a couple key questions about how it's going. Get that data-informed work habit keep it going now. So first, implementation. Are we doing what we set out to do in our plan for program A, B, or C to respond to COVID, right? If we're doing it, okay, we're putting those processes in place we set, how's it going? What challenges are we facing? What are some early successes we need to scale up, right? Second, what are some immediate outcomes we're seeing, or outputs if you think about a logic model, right? Are we reaching who we said we were going to reach? How are their experiences in the programs or with the services? What are some of those beginner measures we've had about completing the program and what folks are attaining or able to do after they finish this emergency response program? And then third, starting to connect this now, what would the long-term impacts of this be if this short-term output we looked at in number 2 continues as a trend? All right, and I thought we would take a really nice opportunity to touch back to some of the sessions earlier in this series. So if you see something that interests you, go back and get it. Some of our presenters earlier in the series already began sharing with us how they were doing just this thing. So in session number 3 in early September, we heard from Northern Virginia Community College and their Jumpstart program, how they were already beginning to look at things as the program was just, as they were getting going and just finishing it. They were looking at things like what districts they were serving students from, what demographic groups the students were from that they were serving, what was the GPA or that ultimate outcome in the course for the students they were serving, and other things. These are just little tiny snippets of larger slides that were shared. But you can see this initiative has this kind of early data look already baked in. So too, when we heard from Indiana in webinar 4, in mid-September, their rapid recovery initiative for next level jobs, they shared with us how they were already sort of on a weekly basis looking at companies that were applying for the program, the applications received, how many trainees were being served through these companies. They were having kind of an equity lens already in the mix with their data look. Are we serving small, mid, and large size businesses? Do we have some minority-owned businesses, women-owned businesses, and the like? And as well, are we serving people across, companies across our state equitably? And finally, last week, we heard about a really exciting initiative in Alabama with virtual learning, virtual reality in CTE. And so we heard how folks getting this program off the ground are already looking at some stats around program completion, hiring, and retention in the companies that hire them, and keeping track of all the partners that are joining. So this is just sort of a quick look at the kinds of things that we're hoping folks are making sure are baked into the things they're doing now when we think about attending to data. Second, and we'll come back to data here in a minute, but second, now we want to think about, all right, this data on early initiatives, emergency responses right now. How is that fitting in? How are we keeping in mind the vision we have for us in our state and long-term prosperity? We want to think about some questions of, all right, what are our visions for the initiatives or programs, measures we're putting in place to bounce back from COVID? And how does that relate to our goals for long-term prosperity? So we're really thinking about, if we look down at these plans to track where we're going, what are our goals? What are our objectives for these kinds of plans? And we've talked in this webinar series about programs around using technology and flexibility in our education and training programs, students, low-skilled adults, businesses, and you may have other initiatives certainly going on in your state, but this kind of covers the gamut of the types of things we've talked about in this series. And then in terms of long-term, what are you thinking about for your people, your businesses, and your economy? And if we think about these as kind of feet, 2 feet, then what we want to be able to do is we go from these plans and then look up, are our feet pointed in the same direction, right? So do the goals and the visions and the objectives for these programs relate? I can speak firsthand about looking through, I'm in the midst of surveying all SREB states, ESSA plans for K-12, Perkins plans for career and technical education, and WIOA plans for workforce development. And I can tell you that when you look across the states, there are lots of cases where the feet are pointing in different directions, right? One's going this way and one's going the other. So this is a really important key look to think about the vision. And then finally, a third piece that we really want folks to attend to here is looking at systems. And right now we're going to look at 4 key ways to think about systems. The funding sources that you bring in, the program goals. Here, of course, it connects to visions, right? But these funding sources come with required goals. So those fundings and goals in that systematic approach, what are some program elements that can be easily or are required to be woven together? And how can we think about performance expectations in a way that makes the whole system work together and the feet kind of point in the same direction? So let's think about funding one at a time here. So funding to help us respond to COVID. If you've been with us on any of these other webinars in the 6, you've seen something like this. For every webinar in this series, we have a tailored resource matrix that shows you to do the things we propose here, we suggest here. Here's how you can use your funding for ESSA for K-12, your Perkins for CTE, your WIOA for workforce, CARES Act for COVID recovery, state funds, and other types of funds that partners bring in. So you can go grab those for any one of those approaches. Today, we're going to think about it in this idea of systems and some of those program elements coming in. And I want to just focus on the 3 here highlighted in light green, the ESSA, Perkins, and WIOA. So with this funding, here linking our vision and our system together, we've got some required or optional goals that states set to guide their programs funded by these statutes. So when we think about kind of 4 main arrows, 4 things getting us where we want to go, the top one, of course, is how are we preparing students academically to be ready for college and careers? And of course, under ESSA, this is required in our K-12 system to get our students graduating ready, prepared for going to post-secondary college, apprenticeships, and right into the workforce. Our Perkins funding, particularly in the secondary area, has an accountability measure that requires programs to be tracked on how well students are doing, not only in the career and technical area, but on those academic standards and assessments set under ESSA. So those 2 kind of goals for academic achievement are really woven tightly together, required by the statutes. When we think about this second arrow down, helping people gain knowledge and skills for in-demand jobs, Perkins and WIOA require this kind of goal. So states in writing their whole plans have to set a goal for preparing an educated and skilled workforce. And believe it or not, when you look at some states' Perkins and WIOA plans, those 2 goals, though it's worded the same way, set a goal for preparing an educated and skilled workforce. You read the goals in the 2 state plans and they're not the same, right? Or they're not closely related enough to really understand how people in the 2 sectors could come together and work collectively on a program. So this is really an area where states have some great work to knit together more closely. And the third one here, this third brown arrow, is ensure employers in those most critical industries in the state, those that need to bounce back the fastest, making sure they can find the talent that they need. And again, here, Perkins and WIOA both set a required goal. State can set whatever goals they want, but they must be a goal towards meeting the skilled workforce needs of employers in the state. So this is an opportunity. And then finally, of course, ensuring equity. All 3 statutes set requirements in the goals and then in the accountability tracking, which we'll come back to in a moment, for closing gaps in opportunity, access, and outcomes. So this next piece looks at some aligned program elements. What are some of the ways that the programs you put in place under these 3 statutes help you knit together that collective journey, the left and the right foot together towards your long-term goal as you're recovering from COVID? So I want to touch on, of course, again, this academic and technical knowledge and skills. So under Perkins and WIOA, it's very clear that programs are meant to do just this. And particularly when we think about CTE programs, they're often thought of just the CTE programs, just the technical, just shop class, right? No, Perkins V requires those programs to really have a deep academic knowledge base knitted together with those standards that are set in place under ESSA. Also, of course, our WIOA programs now have a heightened focus on integrated education and technology, working together to help people in those adult education programs meet those academic bars, get their secondary credentials, and beyond as they're training for a particular occupation. Second, career pathways. We know these, of course, now newly defined under WIOA as integrated education, training, and services that are aligned to the skills needs of a state's industry that are going to prepare individuals to succeed in a range of post-secondary options, get them ready and into college, ready and into those post-secondary industry training programs, into apprenticeships and succeeding there. The career pathways also must, under these statutes, of course, ensure that folks get those key post-secondary credentials they need for those high-paying jobs, and then that it helps them advance in those careers that they choose. So all three sets of funding can be applied towards these career pathways. And so too, as we'll hear from Dale near the end of the session about SREB's Work-Based Learning Commission, all three funds have particular statutes have particular funds that can be applied for different kinds of work-based learning experiences, all the way from career days and career exploration as low as the 5th grade or lower, up through your job shadowing and your virtual dialogue with industry leaders using NEPRIS, let's say, who we heard about from our Louisiana partners in our webinar, was it last week, to internships, pre-apprenticeships, and practicum and the like. Then the fourth element here is support services. Of course, each of the statutes talks about ways in which the fund should be applied to meet the particular needs of participants or students, from tutoring to mentoring, covering the cost of advanced course exam fees, adaptive services for those with disabilities, nutrition support, housing, and then as folks get older, the transportation and the child care. And finally, they all provide for ways in which to provide educators with the professional learning. And in Perkins and WIOA in particular, they require or make it available for states to spend funds to bring those CTE and those K-12 academic teachers together for professional learning and planning, right? So to applying that to expenditures for technology, equipment and materials and facilities. So these are all ways that the statutes enable states to knit their efforts together. And then the last one I'd like to talk about today, this last sort of program element, really does bring the vision, the data, and the systems together. And here's where we're talking about our aligned performance expectations that are going to get us sort of on an annual reporting basis towards that ultimate goal long term. Here's where these indicators are going to help us march up those steps. So we've laid out here, and I'll just kind of go over them really briefly, because at the end we'll look at a couple of publications where we can dive into any of these questions in more depth, or certainly feel free to be tracking your questions and putting them in the chat box, and we can address that in the question section too. But we've got a few elements here, from academic achievement to credential attainment to work-based learning to employment rates after program exit, to equity in access and outcomes that are required or in some cases optional. You see here in each one I've labeled the statute that has this as a required or optional measure. And you can see that all of them have at least 2 of the statutes. And then certainly for other here, under all 3 statutes, states can add additional measures to fit their own state's goal, their own state's vision, which you have at the top of that staircase, right? So states not only can have the required measures and indicators, but they can add others in ways that knit these efforts together more carefully. So what I'd like to do is I've kind of gone really quickly through several points, and I'd like to give us a chance to process a little bit together before we hear from our speaker from Alabama. So what I'd like us to do is Jasmine will have just posted in the chat box a link to a Google Jamboard. So let's take a minute. It's going to look like this when you get to it. And you should be able to click on the link, and you're not going to need to do anything else. You're going to enter, it's anonymous, and you should be able to get in and work on these, use it to think together for just a minute. You'll see that if you click up here on this, what look like slides, that these first 3 boards are what I'd like us to be thinking about. And we'll look at them here in just a sec, but I'll just say to be thinking with us on these, you can come to your left-hand control bar here and get a text box going and type something right away. Or if you want to get colorful, you can open a sticky note, type, and save it, and then you can move it around the board. So you're able, when we're thinking about vision, those program objectives and the long-term goals, ways in which you're thinking now in your state. Perhaps you'd like to put a post here about ways in which this is working well in your state, or a question you have about doing this better, or what's on your mind when you think about uniting this short-term emergency work under COVID to that long-term vision. You can also click up here and just jump to the second board, which is about the data pieces that we talked about. So how are our short-term COVID response programs going? If they keep going the way they're going, are they going to advance our long-term vision? And thinking about those ESSA, Perkins, and WIOA accountability measures that we just looked at. If there's things that come to mind or questions that come to mind for you, pop in, type a question or a thought, a little sticky note. We'll see what's on each other's minds. And third, you can pop over or open up the big view here and click to systems. If there are questions you have or thoughts you have, something you'd like to highlight in your state about the funding, how you're using it, braiding it together to do something, some of those aligned program elements, maybe there's a difficulty, something you'd like to get people to think about together, and some of those coherent performance expectations as well. The fourth one is for later in the session. So we'll stick to these three. And Jasmine, we have the link for folks in the Jamboard, in the chat box.
We do, if you don't mind changing the access to edit.
Oh dear. Okay, sorry guys. I don't know why I didn't do that.
The blue button where it says share. Yep.
Thank you. I should have done. I knew that. I'm sorry.
Where it says viewer. Yep, exactly.
Yep, I just,
There we
sorry.
go.
Okay, all right. So jump in. Everyone should be able to come on in and just kind of paste ideas. It's anonymous, so just let us know what you're thinking on any one of these. You can jump back and forth. What does this make you think about? I see lots of folks on vision right now. Let's go there. Yep. Yeah. I imagine that Dale's work with the Partnerships Commission, as well as much of the other CTE work and career pathways work that Dale is working on and leading at SREB, will speak to this first difficulty here in data about short-term non-credit credentials. And something that's real important here when we think about work-based learning, it's often really hard to find in the state plans anything that can help people across the K-12, CTE, and workforce sector think about what is the career, the work-based learning continuum like in our state. What are the kinds of things individuals can do across their education and training career, and what makes high quality work-based learning? Yeah. I wonder if folks could reflect for us a little bit on whatever sector you may be sort of coming from, higher ed, K-12, or workforce development. Have you seen the accountability reports from the K-12 and the CTE side, or have the K-12 people seen the WIOA accountability reports? How much are we even familiar with each other's data? Wow. Got some stuff here. Transitioning skilled workers from hard-hit industries to now trending in-demand industries. Yes, and how our WIOA centers are helping people do that. Yep, there's the quality piece. Yes, when I've been reading a lot of state WIOA plans, there's just a laundry list of industries towards which the state plans to spend those federal funds. And part of what SREB is thinking about, and some of the publications we put out encouraging states to think about, is is tailoring some of that money and funneling it more towards those most in-demand industries. Better alignment. Yeah. Yeah. Let's take one more minute. Think a little bit more with us, just another minute, and then we'll move on. Anything about systems? Anything about your state you'd like to highlight or ask about bringing funding together? Or performance expectations? This one's maybe a bit more challenging. It's something that we don't do quite as much. It's not quite as natural, right, with silos. So that's why I think you all being here with us for this series has been so important. As for each approach in each of these 6 weeks, we've laid out a funding matrix to show you how these funds can be braided or used together for what parts of the strategies that we have suggested. So we hope that those resource matrices, that green slide in every webinar PowerPoint, that you get that from the SREB website afterwards when you go to the event page, get that and use that. Take that to your cross-sector meetings. Yes, true that. People are scared of braided funding because they want to protect legacy programs. And the question is, what is it that we need to be bringing to the table, and what kind of leadership from the top levels of the state do we need to bring to the table to encourage us more to think about this work as we're doing it together instead of separately, right? So there's the importance of leadership and thinking creatively. That's right. Again, that's where we hope these matrices, the green slides that we've put together for you, are helpful in each session. Yes. All right. Well, here's the beauty of this Jamboard, or Jamboards in general, is we can keep thinking about things together through the session, pop some thoughts in here as we go through the session as they occur to you as well, because what we're going to do is PDF these, and we'll include them as some of the webinar materials in the link after the session. So you'll be able to grab these and keep hold of the thoughts, okay? So keep going. I don't want you to stop. And as you keep these thoughts going in your own mind, we're about to hear now from our colleague in Alabama. Where's my PowerPoint? There it is. From our state exemplar today. Whoa, hold on. There. Okay. So as you keep working in the Jamboard, getting some thoughts together, some questions, because of course we at SREB will use that as well to kind of gauge where everyone is and questions people have as we plan our upcoming work. So too, as you're listening to Nick in Alabama talk here, be jotting down some questions in the chat box you might have about the work in Alabama that he can expound upon, because he's going to have to go through it at kind of a clip as I did through my point. So what are some questions you'd like him to expound on? And we can do that in the end in the Q&A, and certainly too in the chat box if you wish. So without further ado, I would love to welcome our colleague Nick Moore from the state of Alabama. Nick is Governor Kay Ivey's Education Policy Advisor, and he's the coordinator of the Governor's Office of Education and Workforce Transformation. And we asked Nick to come today and talk with us because it is so very challenging to think across those silos, as someone noted in the Jamboard, and think systemically, right? The vision, the systems, and the data all together. And while every state has its challenges in doing that, Alabama is a good example of where this kind of thinking is well underway. And so we wanted to have Nick give us kind of a peek into where they are in that work in Alabama, what it's meant to them, and how any of these pieces of concepts we've talked about in today's webinar so far relate to their work. So with this in mind, Nick, take it away.
All right, well, thanks so much, Dr. Anderson. It is a pleasure to be with you and all of my colleagues from the SREB states. And I actually was great. It was great to see everybody's thoughts right before this, because it's exciting just to see the synchrony between what we're working on in Alabama and a lot of what y'all are thinking. So exciting way to get started. So Governor Ivey came into office in April 2017, and she recognized that Alabama needed to align our education, economic development, workforce efforts into a P20W talent development system for the state. And what we began doing is creating the Strong Start, Strong Finish strategy that includes our attainment goal of adding 500,000 Alabamians to our workforce by 2025. A lot of states have done that. And but what Governor Ivey wanted to do is take that a step further and make sure that we had a strong equity imperative built into the attainment goal by breaking this goal down by each of what we call the opportunity populations in our 2020 WIOA plan. And so this is about vision setting, in that our 2020 plan included Perkins CTE for the first time, and also all of the human service partners and all of the potential partners, along with the 6 programs that are included in the 4 main titles of WIOA. And that allowed us to put together a 2020 plan that complemented the Strong Start strategy that you see here. And really it's developed in 3 strategies for the P20W spectrum. And it begins with pre to 3, and that's a focus on parents as their child's best first teacher. We know that every dollar invested in early learning and early childhood development has the greatest ROI of any investment. And so making sure that we are doing what is best through home visiting, by making sure that we're working with parents for all of the factors that are exogenous to the school day, making sure that for parents that are on a fixed income, that you don't have to be a gourmet chef to cook a meal. But this is not about telling people how to raise their kids. This is about modeling best practices that people really want to do by engaging social capital and by listening to folks and by going into communities and empowering people with resources who are already doing great work. And so that leads into the focus on computer science for Alabama, which is not just about computer science, it's about all new era CTE programs, and it's helping us equalize academic and technical pathways. It's getting us to the point where we understand that academic and technical skills are not mutually exclusive, and that if we're going to have a situation where we, as you'll see, a career pathway model to where a student could complete an apprenticeship, an associate degree, earn credentials, and a high school diploma by the time they're 18, we want them to have a life too, right? So for the first time, we're allowing students to earn credit in an academic and a technical manner by completing computer science. And we're going to continue expanding that train of thought as we develop more new era CTE programs that combine dual enrollment, work-based learning, quality non-degree credential attainment that develop the basis of really dynamic career pathways. And then advanced training, better jobs is what contains our attainment goal, but also a focus on the labor force participation rate, understanding that we have to make sure that work pays for all Alabamians. For the nearly 41% of Alabamians who are currently not participating in the labor force, we want to help them mitigate benefit cliffs that are preventing them from entering into the education and workforce programs that would lead them to self-sufficiency. And that's where the combined 2020 plan comes in, because the governor had a strategy of, through this P20W spectrum, combining intentional workforce development that starts with career pathways, and then the human services and wraparound and supportive services that people need to persist in career pathways. And so a couple examples of braided funding, and we could go on to the logic model because I think that will combine it, yeah, right there. So a couple examples of braided funding, starting with the leadership level, is my office. The GOAT is actually funded with Perkins, adult education, WIOA Title II, and WIOA set-aside funds. And what we do is to help coordinate the vision for 25 agencies that are involved in this education workforce system. And we're combining, as you can see, our economic development, our workforce strategy, and our education strategies, so that we were doing things, for example, like allowing in-school youth to get WIOA ITAs, or individual training accounts. We're doing things like pushing career exploration down to as low as 5th grade, because we see that one of the biggest gaps we have is an experiential deficit. Our students don't know what they want to be if they haven't seen what there is to be. And so by combining career exploration, simulated workplace, and work-based learning, we can somewhat make up for those gaps. So we can move on to the next slide. And so a little bit more about the idea of making the attainment goal intentional and based on equity. I told you that we broke it down by each of the opportunity populations in the WIOA plan. We also broke it down by each of our career clusters. We use the National Career Cluster model, and we wanted to make sure that we could combine our employers and our human service providers with the individuals, the opportunity individuals that are not participating in the labor force, but also be able to map that onto where the in-demand jobs are, so that we are not training people for yesterday's job, so that people do have an opportunity to begin a career pathway that leads to a family sustaining wage. That's very important, particularly if we're talking about working with folks that are in intergenerational poverty, because it is somewhat unknown if you don't understand what is the sequence of credentials and courses that I need to earn to be able to get out of a $10 or $12 an hour position into the next step. And then also being able to do that in a way that allows me to meet my obligations to my family. And so we can move on to the next slide. And so that gets us into the infrastructure. And so what I'd say that what we want to do is deliver the career pathways we've developed to our in-school youth and then to adults who are in different seasons of life, but we're offering the same program of study that is predicated on mapping non-degree credentials. And now that we're in the COVID-19 environment, we are doubling down on asynchronous virtual delivery. And this is really allowing us to democratize educational modalities. For many years, we have been essentially increasing access and increasing attainment, but the way that we're delivering that has never really been expanded to meet the needs of diverse learners and also to be delivered virtually. And so technology has helped us somewhat to make up for that deficit, and to, as we increase access and increase the modalities that really work for people, I want to bring up a opportunity that in the States you should consider doing. So the Strata Public Insight Survey that many of you may have seen recently provided a data set that shows that people do want short-term pathways, short-term workforce and education training programs, particularly those that have been displaced by COVID. They want to upskill into a more resilient sector. They don't want to go into debt, and they would like that to be asynchronous. And so we have an opportunity as states to take advantage of that and to sort of have a glide path into developing these new systems and really aligning it back to your WIOA plan. So we'll go on to the next slide and show an example of how this looks. So if you look with me at the top left-hand corner, for the youth prong, we're combining secondary CTE and post-secondary CTE through dual enrollment and WIOA Title I, because I mentioned to you we're allowing youth to get ITAs now. And so that allows in a compressed manner for an in-school youth to get, as I said, apprenticeship credentials and graduate with an associate at the time of graduation. If we look at the bottom left-hand corner, the adult basic education is being combined with post-secondary CTE and WIOA Title I, and those are sort of the keystone of this model. And they're being combined to open multiple points of entry and exit to adult learners. We're combining things like pre-apprenticeship, the ability to benefit program that really opens up access to someone that might not have a high school diploma or equivalency, and coupling that with a short-term workforce program and industry recognized credentials so people can get an entry-level opportunity occupation and then have access to Pell Grant, Title IV loans. And it's very important as a region that we all work together as well as we begin reauthorizing of the discussion of the Higher Education Act and WIOA, and hopefully they're going to get around to that in the next couple of years. But we need to make sure that we can demonstrate through our delegations that we can vouchsafe the quality of short-term and non-degree programs. That's been a big stumbling block. And also, I think we have to make it clear that we are articulating these programs back to traditional 2- and 4-year degrees. It's not an adversarial relationship between traditional higher education and these more competency-based systems. Competency-based learning can be articulated through prior learning assessment and then just through articulated credit towards a traditional degree. And as we all know that have followed the work of the Georgetown Center on Education and the Workforce, people truly do want a general mix of the short-term employability skills with general academic skills, and that provides long-term labor market value. But to my original point here before we move on, we conducted a survey called the Alabama Survey of the Underemployed and Unemployed during the month of August. And our native data set really is similar to what the Strata results showed us. And a plurality of Alabamians who have been unemployed or displaced, over 700,000 people since February, do want short-term programs. They want them to be articulated back to a 2-year degree. They want them to be in in-demand fields. In Alabama, Our industry mix is manufacturing, healthcare, IT, transportation, and construction. It's different in other places, but that's why we're focusing. And congratulations to Arkansas, I believe. And I'm sorry if I'm leaving someone else out, but I think another state on the line got one of the Reimagining Workforce Prep grants. But we're going to be using that grant to operationalize this two-pronged career pathway model and to meet the needs of incumbent workers who need to reskill or upskill to keep their job in this environment, or for those that have been displaced to be able to reskill into a more in-demand industry. There's a moral imperative to do this. I wish I had slides from the St. Louis Fed on here to share with you that shows the nature that, so we kind of reached an apogee of labor force participation in 1997. It declined precipitously until Governor Ivey got into office. And because of her intentional focus on connecting workforce and human services, we saw that go up over a point between when she entered office until the time the pandemic began. And it really was devastated, but actually we've seen it rebound. And so, you know, anybody that's a labor market economist would tell me not to hang my hat on that too much because it's the vicissitudes in there. But because we were able to rebound that labor force participation rate, that somewhat shows that the focus on really giving people what they want, connecting a reciprocal feedback loop between employers, between job seekers, and education and training providers is going to allow people to more easily overcome those barriers. So let's skip to 2 slides forward. So data-driven decision-making. Alabama is one of the last states in the union to develop a state longitudinal database system. And this gives us a particularly an advantage because we get to learn from a lot of other states like you. But there's not a whole lot to say about this other than the product that it's providing. So let's skip to the next slide. So our asset is our learning and employment record. This, a lot of people call it different things: a digital wallet, verified resume. The U.S. Chamber Foundation was calling it an integrated learning record until about 2 weeks ago. Then we got a memo that it's now learning and employment record. We call it the Alabama College and Career Exploration Tool. It connects career exploration, the integrated WIOA case management system, and your verified resume so that individual job seekers can have their asset profile queried by employers who were working to develop skills-based job descriptions, and all of a sudden we can get past just the virtue signalings of competence and just popping in a 2-year degree when some 75% of your workforce doesn't even have an associate's degree. So we're helping to make sure that the educational requirements and the HR side of the hiring process are more in line with the skills and competencies that are actually happening on the job floor. Next slide, please. And the system, the infrastructure we're developing is called the Alabama Occupational Ontology, but this work is being done through a third-party intermediary that's codified called the Alabama Committee on Credentialing Career Pathways. It's got a 2-pronged mission of first identifying the in-demand jobs in the state annually, and then developing competency models, career pathways, and a system of classification that replaces ONET and sort of lives out the Lumina Beta credential framework. But the first work here is done using this 5-star rubric, and I won't belabor all the points, but just say we run every occupation in the state through this rubric and figure out if it meets the criteria. It gets onto a state and then regional list. If it's in value in more than 2 regions, it's on the state list. And so then, next slide. And this is just an example. We can skip past this. That's what the list looks like. But this is what our competency taxonomy looks like. Every individual skill, we give an alphanumeric number because we want to develop skill shapes, not just a static competency model. It's the same in every state, but we want to norm what the interaction between job postings, job descriptions, and the credentials and competencies that are connected to those jobs so we can, by region, by firm, know the variations. Next slide, please. And then we develop competency models, but y'all are probably familiar with this. It's the Urban Institute and ETAs develop these. The bottom 4 we're connecting into a customized ready-to-work credential so that it prepares anybody for the entry-level occupation in any career pathway. And it couples all the traditional job readiness skills with industry-specific skills so that this is WIOA recognized credential. A lot of states have had trouble trying to get an occupational readiness credential to count as a WIOA recognized post-secondary credential. And so that's why we got it to be a license recognized by the state and then added the industry-specific skills. And next slide, and I'm going to wrap it up quick here. So we'll move past this. And next slide. And so let's go back to one more back. All right, right here. So we use these criteria to determine what credentials then are valuable. And we have a credential registry, a partnership with the Lumina Foundation and Credential Engine, and we want to register every credential in the state to help us develop this competency-based infrastructure. So whether it's valuable or it's not valuable, you got to register in order to have a chance to be put on the valuable list. So we developed something called the Compendium of Valuable Credentials based on the credentials that are mapped to one of our in-demand occupations, and it have most of these criteria here. Next slide. And so then if we went zip past it, but if you saw that alphanumeric number at the very top of that competency, you would see that that same one we put in here at that last field at the top there. And so that just shows you how we're connecting each credential with the competencies that they denote mastery of. And that's what forms our ontology of skills. And next slide. And this just gives you a little bit more information about our credential registry, but the bottom line is that we want to reach a tipping point by next year to where we have more than half of our credentials registered. And we want everybody in the game, all providers, occupational licensing boards, education and workforce training providers, eligible training provider list, any other type of licenses mandated by the state, plus those that are provided by other industry trade groups. We can move on to the next slide. And we also are using work-based learning as a catalyst here. We got the Alabama Office of Apprenticeship was codified in the same bill as the ACCCP. And we, in fact, last week were approved to serve as a standards recognition entity in manufacturing as one of the first 18 entities that got in that work. We also put some language in the legislation that created the AOA that ensures that our state has a primary role in determining quality of industry recognized apprenticeships that come into the state, which the governor was quite prescient on, because in Part B of 29 Part 29 of the federal code came in and created the whole new process for IRAPs. And so we were glad we had this in advance. All right, next slide. I mentioned that so we can move forward. And then last thing I'll note here is in connecting the dots between that career pathway model and the need to help people overcome benefit cliffs, we created DAVID, or the Dashboard for Alabamians to Visualize Income Determinations, in partnership with the Atlanta Fed, so that as we create a no wrong door approach to the public workforce system, when individuals come into, whether it's our Human Resource Center, American Job Center, community college, we give them the Goldilocks package of education, workforce benefits, and human services to hold them harmless into the transition into paid work. That's why we're beginning to make some progress on our labor force participation rate, because we take the approach that if somebody's not in the labor force, that's because they have a barrier that makes work not pay for them. So our job is to abate those barriers, and whether it's transportation, housing, and childcare, or whether it's just the fact that something costs $100 and something costs $100 and somebody's got 99, that last dollar approach really helps. So I will end it there, Dr. Anderson, and would be honored to address any questions anybody might have.
Excellent. All right. So I've got one for sure. Jasmine, what might have come into the chat box?
Right now, people are still digesting the information, so I will let you know as soon as I get some questions in.
Okay. So I'll kick us off then, and I recognize that we're 7 minutes before our stop time anyway. But Nick, this work is inspirational in a lot of ways. One way that I imagine folks might be thinking about is to get these things done and get everyone pointed in this same direction. There must have been some tricks of the trade, some tips, some workarounds that you found in terms of how to break down those silos. Someone mentioned it in the Jamboard, and it's certainly something that you see when you look at the ESSA, Perkins, and WIOA plans, and they seem to be going in different directions. And just, you know, wherever one might be, one knows what we're talking about when we say people work in silos, right? So as you've had to get together governors people, workforce people, K-12 people, CTE, businesses, community, what have been some of the ways in which you've made that happen, or roadblocks you came across and how you jumped over them? Just getting people around the table.
Excellent question, Dr. Anderson. Gubernatorial leadership is key. ESSA, WIOA, and Perkins are aligned by design, sort of by Congress, if you've got a strong governor that creates a vision statement rather than a compliance document in your state. And for many states, there's been a period of time to where you might come in, and I think this is going to be very important as there's transitions into next year and we have new governors in the region, to make sure that they understand the role, paramount role that the governor has in WIOA in the foremost way, and then also the leverage that a governor can have in the development of the CTE and ESSA plan. Governors can't play a passive role. The governor should be playing an active role and should be at the table in the development of your comprehensive local needs assessments and your WIOA performance indicators. I'll give you one firm example. There is a sort of an adverse incentive in WIOA in the performance indicators to only count the people who walk in the door. So you look at your 6 performance indicators and 10 people walk in the door and you serve 9 of them well, wow, we're doing a good job. But we didn't take into account that we've got 6,000 people that fit into opportunity populations in your WIOA plan in that area, and none of them walked in the door. So that then allows you to make the denominator, rather, instead of the number of people that walk in the door, the number of people there that you're supposed to be serving. And then the numerator needs to be how many you served. And then that generates an evangelical approach, not in the religious sense, but in the sense that your people are going to be going out and reaching people where they are. That develops a segmented marketing strategy, not a stale, let's go find a job today kind of marketing, but reaching people, getting down in the grass where people can reach it. And that includes developing strategies that destigmatize career pathways for parents, more peer-based interaction with youth. And all of this first starts with strong gubernatorial leadership. It just won't happen unless you have that.
Yep, that's right. Thank you for that. I have one more question, but I want to hold. Jasmine, did any other questions come in?
No, please go ahead.
Okay, so one last one, and then we'll begin looking towards wrapping up. Nick, I know that you all began this work. You mentioned Governor Ivey came into office in 2017. So you've begun this work fairly recently, but COVID has come into the picture even more recently. So are there ways in which the work that you were doing as you had it conceptualized has had to morph or change? Either this longer term work as you had it conceptualized changed, or the pieces of what you wanted to do to address COVID had to be tailored in the right way to fit? Like, which way have you been fitting things in, or how are the COVID initiatives, again, fitting into this longer term picture?
So another excellent question. So we think about the fact that people are now demanding short-term, asynchronous, competency-based programs that articulate to traditional degrees. We were talking about that and trying to get it done theoretically, and with some trepidation out there, right? I mean, that's sort of avant-garde for some people. So what COVID-19 has done in many ways is not only caused us to double down on some of these strategies that, for example, connecting career pathways to a new occupational ontology, work-based learning, data-driven decisions, some of these things that we were talking about in theory, and we're making incremental progress, and we're making, quite a bit of progress. Now we'll repeat as sort of on a glide path, because a lot of the philosophical opposition has just been eliminated due to the fact that there is a moral, economic, and social imperative that we make these things happen for folks. So a lot of the people that have been saying for years, we need to make sure that we've got learning modalities that meet the needs of diverse learners, that we need to ensure that we are looking at the interests and aspirations and then connecting that to the economic needs of our employers. All of that is now an existential thing for people. It's not just something that's philosophical to talk about. And I think the states, the governors, the IHEs, that get on board and do that are going to thrive and survive in the COVID and the post-COVID-19 environment. And those that are sort of late on the draw there, it's going to be tough.
Yep, that's right. Yep, thank you for that reflection. Yes. Agreed, agreed. So let's go. Let's think about this then, where this fits in overall. Nick has been really generous to share this inspiring work in Alabama, and we can see ways in which a lot of what we've talked about over this series kind of fits in. And again, as we're wrapping up today, we hope that you'll share this link with others to go back and review the presentations, to get those materials and your slide decks. And we'll end by reminding everybody that here at SREB, we stand ready to support you. We do things like supporting action of the kind you're hearing about today. So we've just completed another group within SREB of our colleagues have completed a webinar series on helping teachers and those program leaders in education kind of upskill, right? And learn those online and digital technologies to support education programs. And as well, Dale, SREB's Vice President for School Improvement, Dr. Dale Winkler, I wanted him to say just a bit here about the career pathways development work SREB does and our new commission report.
Thank you, Kim. I'll be very brief. You and Dr. Pruitt alluded to this earlier, but in 2018, SREB convened a commission to examine the role of industry sector partnerships in supporting and advancing work-based learning and other policies and practices necessary to prepare the workforce for the future. These were leaders representing private and public sectors, industry, secondary and post-secondary education served on the commission, and they contributed their time generously to this effort. And following their deliberations and a lot of research by our analysts here at SREB, the commission, they adopted 11 recommendations and as promising and timely practices. And so on October 13th, we will be releasing the report of the commission, where you will be able to see those 11 recommendations with examples and evidence from states across the nation. And also, we're planning a similar webinar series to this one. There will be 3 sessions that will be held in November and December, where we dive into those 11 recommendations and have presenters who will share some promising practices. And that also ties closely with our Career Pathway Initiative. Over the past 3 years, or 4 years now, SREB has been working with a couple states in the development of seamless pathways for advanced manufacturing and nursing. And both of these pathway programs of study, successful students are guaranteed an interview for employment with participating industries after high school graduation and upon attainment of a targeted post-secondary credential. Both career pathways are also designed to minimize college tuition costs to participating students and their families. And this work all builds on previous commissions that we've had at SREB, our Commission on Career and Technical Education, one on community colleges in the South, and also college affordability. So if you go to our website, you can learn more about our Career Pathway Initiative, but be on the lookout October 13th when we will release the new Commission on Strategic Partnerships and Work-Ready Students.
Excellent. Excellent. So that's supporting action and convening and engaging some really exciting resources we have for you. We hope you draw on those. And then finally, in the publishing and analyzing piece, there's not only the report that Dale mentioned that we'll be putting out, but know that these resources are out there too to support you in this very topical piece here that we're talking about in this webinar series. We have some state workforce outlook reports, state by state, here at this link that they're based on some deep data analysis and research on each state. And then 2 publications that I've worked on around opportunities to align that ESSA work with the CTE work under Perkins and the workforce development work under WIOA that you can draw on as well. And you see the links there. And there are others, so feel free to reach out to us and ask about other things you might be wondering or need some help with. As we head out today, a minute or 2 late, before I hand it over to Stephen to take us out, I wanted to invite you to provide us some feedback. You can do it anonymously or in the chat box, and not so anonymously. If you want to do it on the Jamboard, you'll just go to that link where you went earlier to these 3 jams, and you can click over to the 4th one, the black one, and it offers you an opportunity to write out here what's a strength, something we could improve next time. Dale mentioned we're planning a webinar series as we speak to follow up on this one. So what do we want to keep in mind to meet your needs even more, even better? And the last one, a topic related to this or unrelated, but it's on your mind now that you'd like some more information on or support with, feel free to tap that into the Jamboard or again in the chat box. So to take us out, Stephen.
So again, thank you all for being here. Nick, really appreciate your being here and being a part of this. Learned some great stuff. Always do whenever you speak to our group. I want to just put a little exclamation point on something though for all of you that are still with us, that, you know, we've been doing this work around unprepared and unaware and the impact this is going to have. We are going to be releasing a new report next month that looks at how COVID has actually impacted the workforce based on our numbers. And I will just give you a little bit of a spoiler alert here. We had set 2030 as kind of the horizon where the workplace would change drastically because of automation and artificial intelligence. Folks, I hate to break it to you, but COVID accelerated it by about 5 years. Our work with, in looking at the data from McKinsey Global is saying now the horizon's 2025. That's right around the corner. So our work is all the more important. It's all the more urgent. And so we look forward to working with you and trying to figure out how to ensure that each person in our region has the opportunity to be a viable member of our economy and to allow them to chase their own version of the American dream. So thank you all for being with us and for being a part of this series. And we look forward to doing this again and offering you more things that can be thought-provoking and help you on the way to helping your citizens.
Thanks, everyone. Again, we'd love your feedback, chat box or Jamboard. Have a wonderful day. Stay well, stay healthy. Have a good weekend.
Thanks. I know a few more of you are still online. I am getting some feedback via chat, so feel free to still use that or the Jamboard. You can do that now. That will be active. If you come up with some thoughts later in the day, you can still share those with us. Okay, I'll give it just about 1 more minute. If you would like to add anything else. Great. Well, thank you all for joining us. We will look forward to getting your feedback and sharing future information with you. Our information is shared. If you didn't have a chance to jot it down, we will send out a copy of today's recording along with the slides, so you can reach out to us at any time. Thanks again and have a great rest of your week. Bye-bye.